is what's up with the banks, right? You've all heard these news, and a lot of stuff is going on. And I really kind of wanted to, Paul. So here's what. So we're going to have a conversation, gang, and I want you all to be a part of this conversation. Make sure you send your questions about it as we go along. It's going to be me and Paul talking about banking and kind of what's going on. So here's what was interesting to me, Paul. So I caught this first article. This was dated March 11th, before kind of the stuff hit the fan. And the Hawaii Bankers Association says, this was last week Friday, hey, customers can bank knowing it's safe. At this point, FDIC has stated that this is an isolated incident and there's no indication of systemic issues affecting the banking industry. That was the quote the previous week. And on March 11th, and then almost on cue, the stock prices dived for both First Hawaiian Bank and Bank of Hawaii, almost on cue right after they said that. First Hawaiian took a not as bad as Bank of Hawaii. Bank of Hawaii stock is down 32%. This was as of a couple of days ago. Stock down 32 year to date, 32%. Bank of Hawaii down 16%. So something's going on, right? And then, of course, and then I see the counterfactual. Then I see this headline: First Hawaiian Bank, top bank. And of course, then I see Bank of Hawaii puts their press release saying, "Hey, we're also a top ranked bank as well." So that was another great thing, right? And then all of a sudden, and then now I'm seeing all these crazy headlines that are coming up. And it's just like, one after the other, no fallout with the isolated incident, right? Isolated incidents. Like, no, I don't think so. So Paul, you're muted. Now it's your turn.
I was going to say, thank you, Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, for creating this world. we get our financial analytics from TikTok. I mean, confidence is liquidity, right? And people in an information age where social media is enormously adept at conveying misinformation or disinformation or information which, in the absence of the proper context or analytical construct, can be scary, fear-inducing, and so confidence is liquidity. So as people lose confidence in aspects of the financial system, you'll see liquidity move away, right? Run away, flee from perceived or putatively risky sectors and swarm to the perceived or putatively safe sectors. So you see deposits fleeing from First Republic to Bank of America or JP Morgan, or right from the regional banks to the money center banks, because a regional bank or a couple regional banks had a problem, and therefore all regional banks on in the Twitterverse or in Facebook world must have problems, and that flight go and the people abandon one position, swarm to another. What do those guys do with the liquidity? Dude, they deposit it back. Right? I'm getting the names mixed up, but I know a bunch of money went to the money centers, and then the money center put the money in First Republic, whence it originated. So
wait, hold on. Wait. So I got to unpack that. Unpack that, because that is hilarious. So
okay, it is kind of hilarious.
It is hilarious, right? So hold on. So okay. So Silicon Valley Bank says, something goes blip. Of course, it's Silicon Valley, so it goes out in the Twitterverse. It goes out in the Twitterverse.
For sure.
That we need this has got to be. We need I don't want to call it a bailout, but we need the feds to step in and save this bank. Otherwise, there's going to be a collapse. So something happens,
or not. I mean,
or not. But that's what they said. That's what they're saying.
That's like beachfront home. It's like beachfront homeowners, right? You built, bro. You built your house in Lava Zone 1 in Puna on the East Rift of the Kilauea volcano, and then surprise, the volcano erupted and inundated your house and lot. What did you think was going to happen? You built your house on the point at Camilands. You know what I mean? at Sunset Beach. And I don't know if you've heard, but the sea is rising. Yo, that's your risk. That's not our risk. You you built a bank in Silicon Valley that 90% of the deposits of which exceeded the FDIC insurance limits. And instead of comprising tens or hundreds of thousands of small depositors, like the big banks in Hawaii, for example, numbered maybe 2,500 venture capital funds and unicorns that the stock market for several years has been giving free to whom Wall Street has been giving free money. These are companies that maybe they have a concept, but they don't have a product and they don't have a service and they don't have income, not to mention net income. So it's just a question of what's the burn rate on the capital that they acquired from, you know, investors willing to take the risk. And now they're trying to make payroll in a world in which, things have changed post pandemic. And at the end of the day, in all three of these situations I'm talking about, whether you're building your house on top of a volcano or building your house right on the beach in front of a big surf spot in a world of climate change and sea rise, or investing in a bank that 90% of the deposits of which are uninsured. And when those depositors lose confidence, because confidence is liquidity, they move big amounts of money out of your bank, not the dollar tree 80 that everybody gets at Brada's bank over here. You know what I mean? So, I mean, and we haven't even started talking about the asset side of the balance sheet because that's more complicated. I'm just saying, right? You're free to move around the country. You're free to conduct business anywhere in the country. You're free to invest anywhere you want in the country. You're free to go work in different parts of the country, as you and I are, and engage in a conversation such as this. And you're free to move your funds around the country within the banking system. Indeed, this is how we do that. Boom, on our cell phones. So that's the world we live in. Surely you can't, surely you had to know, if you're running an extraordinarily unusual even for an idiosyncratic bank, an organization or balance sheet that had the particular characteristics of Silicon Valley. We can come back to that in a second. Surely you knew that at some point, under the circumstances we faced in the last year, let's say with rising interest rates, or under the circumstances that we faced in the 3 years since the onset of the pandemic and the consequences of that event, and now as it recedes into history, the new world that we've entered, surely you knew that you were at risk. Surely you knew that if you built your house on the beach with climate change and sea rise, you were at risk. Surely you knew that if you built your house on the east rift of Kilauea volcano, Ta'ai was not on your side. And the question is, should you be bailed out? Now, the way we set up the banking system, depositors up to 250,000, which seems like enough, are guaranteed, are insured by the banking system. The banks pay the insurance premiums so that when one or another bank has trouble, or when one or another, spuriously or otherwise, when one or another bank is faced with deposit runoff because of some rumor that showed up on social media or whatever, the system's set up to backstop those depositors so that in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, you don't have Jimmy Stewart trying to explain to all the depositors with their little savings passbook. Remember those?
Great
That
scene.
no, Joe,
Great
your
scene.
money is in Bob's house over there, and Myrtle, your money is in Jane's restaurant down the street. Um, anyway, I'm blathering, but
So
that's
no, no, no. It's good stuff. So
it's
there's a couple.
risk, and sometimes you need to bear it, and we insure the people that shouldn't have to bear it, the depositors, up to a reasonable amount. But large depositors, people who are getting free money from Wall Street for several years, and then couldn't think of anything to do but park it and then just burn it like rocket fuel to make payroll while they developed their AI concept or whatever it was. I mean, those guys have a different risk management exposure, the depositors as well as the banks that are managing their funds, than the ordinary person for whom, under the New Deal in the 1930s, we set up deposit insurance so that people wouldn't engage in bank runs, like in Mary Poppins, right? Tuppence a bag, what is it? Right? If you invest tuppence wisely in the bank. Yeah, no, we did. That's only in the movies.
So we get a couple of okay, so there's a good kind of a baseline. What I'm hearing you say is basically, they essentially, what the bank did is they did the equivalent of buying, beachfront land in an erosion place, or they bought on the Rift of Kilauea. They knew it was risky, but they did it anyway, and now they're sort of asking. So let's do this. I got a couple. There's a couple of questions that have popped in, because I do want to focus more on the Hawaii side, because we have a couple of
Yeah,
questions that have come
yeah,
in. So Mark says there's a few, and they're representative. So Mark says, "Hey, is it smart to move money from mainland banks to Hawaiian banks?" That's one question. Jeff Halverson said, "Hey, look, as long as you don't panic, Hawaiian banks will be fine." Okay, fine. And then Mark again says, "Hey, you mentioned the asset side of the balance sheet. Are the loans at Hawaii banks healthy?" So let's hit the thing on, on the
yeah.
idea of that. Let's talk about the Hawaii banks. So are the Hawaii banks, are Hawaii banks safe? Okay, the stock price went down. That means something. Investors don't think that they think that they could put their investment money elsewhere. But what about the bank? Let's talk about the Hawaii banks, Paul.
Yeah.
Are the Hawaii do Should I be worried? The easy one is, look, if I got under 250,000, I'm fine, because FDIC is insured no matter what. But I don't want to know the idea of a bank run happening at the bank, and I'm just going to leave my money there because I know it's safe. I'm a little bit just concerned. Could this thing, could this thing be a contagion, and could the banks be affected, or is it affecting something else? Like, does it affect loans, or does it affect borrowing, or will it affect interest rates? What, if anything, is the effect? I'm the regular guy. I'm not an economist. I'm just a regular guy. I do computer stuff, Paul. I got my money in the bank, Bank of Hawaii.
Yep.
What's the, or First Hawaiian Bank, whatever. What's the deal? Should I be worried?
First of all, a bank is a computer, so there you go. Are I'm just saying, are Hawaii banks safe? Wow, that's okay. There's more than four words in the answer to the forward question, but I have to backtrack just a little bit to clarify where I'm coming from. First of all, I am not giving investment advice.
Yes, we
So,
have to stress that. Thank
you
you.
know,
We have
I,
to
I
stress
don't know
that.
where your money is under your mattress or whatever, but I'm not telling
Thank you
you
for
where it
saying
should
that.
be.
Thank you for
Um,
saying that. It's just you and me talk. Everybody,
it's a
it's
good
just me
it's
and
a
Paul
it's a
talking.
good question, and the answer to the question is number one, are your deposits in excess of 250,000? Because, dude, got some extra? I could use some, but I'm just saying, up to 250,000, you're insured. So we're done. Go home, cook rice. You know what I mean? There's no problem here.
Cook rice, which is
Um,
now up 40%, according to the last thing that I just heard. Super expensive. Rice is way
yeah,
more expensive than it used.
I
Anyway, I'm
mean,
sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
last year it was avian flu. I don't know what's going on in the rice crop, but if if the prices farmers receive are 40% higher than they were last week, I'm planting buku rice this spring. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Absolutely.
for, forget the soybeans, man. Let's plant rice.
I'm
Right
sorry. I
supply and
threw you
demand.
off.
No,
I threw
that's
you
fine.
off. So you're
Um,
250, under
so
250, you're fine. Go
under
home, cook
250, you're
rice. Don't
fine.
worry.
But a better answer is do your diligence. Don't give money to somebody you don't know. Some guy calls you up and says they're a Nigerian somebody and they're gonna, yeah, no, man. You hear all these scams where old people get talked out of writing checks for thousands of dollars to people who call them on the phone. Yeah, okay. Do your diligence. What I suggested on TV the other night, which sounded really smart, and now I can't remember what it was, so I have to keep looking it up, was something like, the answer to your question, are Hawaii banks safe? I mean, yeah, look, good people, lots of experience, a proven track record, and then the tough part, a solid risk management culture. That's the hard part to monitor as an investor or a depositor in a commercial bank. But pay attention. Who's in leadership? What's the experience of those individuals? What's the track record of the institution? I mean, First Hawaiian Bank has only been around for what, 170 ? Is that, Bank of Hawaii's only been around for what, like 120 years or something like that. So that they've been through a couple things, like World War didn't blow up those banks. So I'm just saying, do your diligence. But that last piece, the risk management piece, is a really important one, because you can have really good risk management and still get blown out by, a black swan. And there's another aspect of that that's relevant right now, because you showed earlier the bank stock prices. You have to think about what's going on in a world with what's called information asymmetry. You and I know more about Hawaii than the average investor, right? The average investor, I'm not going to talk about individual companies, but uh, at least a couple of the Hawaii regional bank stocks have experienced the same downdraft in their stock prices in the last week as has occurred in regional banks nationwide, because they're regional banks. They're not money center banks. They're not the top 15 SIFIs, systemically important financial institutions, that have a much more rigorous regulatory and risk management um, uh, oversight framework under which they operate. And there is an argument to be made that the number 16 bank, Silicon Valley Bank, should have been either on that list, or at least should have had more rigorous examination or regulatory. People talk about stress tests, for example, that under the last presidential administration, uh, you know, uh, legislators and the administration decided, yeah, now you guys don't have to do your homework. And it's like, no, 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 those guys should keep doing their homework, right? So that, all of these things are part of this problem of, uh, as I say, this final piece, this sort of understanding risk management. Now, you talked about loans and whatnot. The in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, this is how different that bank was from a customary regional bank. Their deposits, we already talked about. 90% of Silicon Valley Bank's deposits were over the FDIC insurance threshold. That's cray, right? First Republic, I think something like 60%. I mean, these are huge quantities. That's not the case for the typical local regional bank, but you'll have to look it up. I don't know the numbers at First Hawaiian Bank of Hawaii. Go look it up on the right. Go to the regulators,
So what you want to
the
look up,
SEC or the FDIC. I mean, if you're
so
that serious
specifically,
about it, you can look it up on
right.
the FDIC. You can
So
look up their.
the specific question would be to look up, if you wanted to, if you want to kind of geek out and research it, would be something along the lines of what you would look for. What percentage of depositors have over 250,000? What would be the, if I was doing a
If
Google
I were doing
search
that
for
right now, I would actually go look at what the bank analysts are saying about that. Go find
bank
out
analyst?
what the bank analysts, because they're the ones that will drill down into the weeds for you. But that's an anomaly on the liability side, right? The bank is liable to you. They hold your deposit, which is, they stand ready to provide you with the cash on any day you require. On the asset side of the balance sheet, Silicon Valley Bank was also very different, because more than half of Silicon Valley's assets were in securities like US Treasury securities. In fact, I think US Treasury securities actually dominated their portfolio. I'm not sure about that, but excuse me. Here's the problem with that in in the economic environment of the last year. You'd have to be living in a cave not to know that Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee that makes monetary policy decisions was not to know that they were going to raise interest rates over the last year. He gives a press conference after every meeting. You know what I mean? Don't they have one like next week, or is that tomorrow? Anyway, they've got a meeting coming up. You don't
Right.
need my forecast for interest rates. They publish their forecasts, the guys that set the overnight rate. So, and then they provide forward guidance. They tell you about where they're going, by how much, probably how fast, under what circumstances they'll go faster, under what circumstances they'll go slower. If the inflation rate's higher, we go faster. If you blah blah blah. So pay attention. And that started a year ago. It's not like ancient history. Around February, January, February, March, unfortunately, contemporaneous to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and breakout of avian flu. I mean, it's just always something hitting the fan, right? Like Rosanna down said, if it's not one thing, it's another. And those interest rate increases caused the values of existing securities, treasury securities, mortgage backed securities, and so on, to decline in value. Now, under accounting rules, bank accounting rules, if those securities are held in what's called the available for sale portfolio, where on any given day you stand ready to buy and sell securities. And most banks, including the banks in Hawaii, for example, will originate mortgages and then sell the mortgages and buy the mortgage-backed securities to hold rather than the individual mortgages, so as not to be exposed to the individual risk, but the pooled risk, which is much lower. You see what I mean? Credit cards, auto loans, I think business loans, there's securitization happens in all of these areas. A majority of mortgage loans in America are made online, right? Fintech is generating loan volumes that go into these securities pools. Now, the problem is before last year, before the Fed, awakened by the post-pandemic inflation, responded by raising interest rates to tamp down the demand side of the economy, which outran supply, right, with the global supply chain hangups. Prior to that moment, interest rates have been very low, like near zero, which meant that bond prices were relatively high, right? The difference between what you pay and what the face value of the security was very narrow because there's only a 25 basis point yield on that security. But then the Fed had to act. And a majority of people in Hawaii today have never lived in a time when interest rates rose by 400 or 425 or 450 basis points. Most people in Hawaii, most realtors have never lived in a time when the mortgage interest rate went from 3% to 7% in less than 12 months. That happened. What happened to the prices of those securities? They fell. If you're holding those securities in an actively traded account, every quarter you mark to market the value. You say, what is it this? Oh, it went down. I have to show that on my balance sheet, and I have to book that on paper loss against the net worth of the company, assets less liabilities. If, however, those securities are held to maturity, you don't plan to sell them, you're just going to park them, take the interest until the securities mature 10 years from now, or 7 years, or 20 years, or whatever, then the accounting rule is different. And that loss is latent, it's still on your balance sheet, kind of parked, because later when interest rates go down, and they probably will, those values will go up, and the account say, okay, no foul, no, it's, no, it's fine. Wait till maturity and those securities will pay off what they were going to pay off. Silicon Valley Bank, unlike my impression of the Hawaii banks, unlike my impression of regional commercial banks in general, Silicon Valley Bank had a way larger exposure in this held to maturity category on a portfolio over half of which comprised these kinds of securities: treasury securities, mortgage-backed securities, agency debt. And as a result, had a massive loss, which, when you look at it on paper, looks kind of scary. That's like when your boss told you you never have to come back to the office, you can work remotely for as long as you want, and you realize, OMG, I don't have to commute to work every day. I'm buying a house by my favorite surf spot on the North Shore, and I'm going to zoom it in every day from here on out. And you bought your house in the summer of 2021 at the peak of the market at a 3% mortgage. And what happened to the value of that house in the last 18, 20 months as interest rates rose? It went down, as all the realtors that are in your audience know. So that loss is a paper loss. If you live in your house to maturity, you'll probably enjoy appreciation over the remainder of the life of the house. You don't have to like realize that loss. But at a commercial bank, in the available for sale portfolio, you have to realize it. And at Silicon Valley Bank, where an unusually large proportion of those implicit or latent losses were not being booked, people looking at that were saying, yeah, that's kind of sketchy. I'm out of here. And then a couple loud voices in the venture capital community, who maybe should have just zipped it, said, I'm getting the hell out. You should too. That was really a disservice to the banking system. And here's the thing, we're all bailing their sorry asses out or something. I don't know what the FDIC decided over the weekend, and the Treasury. I mean, they had a conversation, Janet Yellen and the gang, and said, you know what? Fine, let's just cover everybody. It's not taxpayers, right? We'll just direct the FDIC to cover everybody's deposits, even those bozos who had held more than in the assured amounts were burning down their rocket fuel, to cover payroll because they don't actually have a product, and we're then lipping about how everybody should get out of yeah, those guys. The deposit insurance system is large enough that it can handle this particular shock. And here's an important, really key point: contain, put a force field around what otherwise might have become a greater contagion. Now there's fallout, and you need to pay attention. And I'm not saying that other banks aren't exposed to the same risk. And that's why the question is, what's the quality of their risk management team? What's the culture? What's the risk management culture in those organizations? I mean, I can tell you, when I was in banking, we got spanked. We got spanked by the. In fact, I joined the bank as a intern, as a consultant. I was just surfing, and I got a side job, and during the Latin American debt crisis in 1981, 82, 82. In 81, I worked at the bank. We did a country risk index and predicted the Latin American debt crisis. So they thought I was a genius, even though it was just dog luck. But the Japan bubble came and went. The Asian financial crisis came and went. At least where I worked, we were disciplined. We had management changes that brought in a team that was very focused on mitigating adverse selection and moral hazard, the way we teach it to undergraduates at the University of Hawaii. Selecting from the population of prospective borrowers, people are going to pay you back, and then once you've made the loan, monitoring and helping. Man, I mean, people have trouble. Banks run into problems. Pandemics happen, and you've got a couple months, or maybe more without income. Banks are in a position to help you work through those things. But
So let me jump in here.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
I think maybe in retrospect, the risk management culture at Silicon Valley Bank, and sort of the attitude in Silicon Valley, in the sort of on the tech frontier, you work with these people, has like an extra dose of hubris, maybe, that we're smarter than the other kids. And
so there's a couple of points over here, but before we move on, I do want to give a shout out to another great old friend of mine, Ken Tomey. Ken, haven't seen you in a long time, buddy. Good to see you. Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm super stoked to have Paul over here in this conversation. Sterling's got a question for us, which I'm going to hold off for a moment because it's a good one. So hold on to that, Sterling. I'm going to pop it up in a sec. So Paul, so the quick, the computer minute guy is trying to kind of summarize this really quick. What I'm basically hearing is that Silicon Valley Bank had a bad combination of a bunch of things that kind of all kind of came together. On the asset side, they had way too many government securities that kind of went down in value on paper, but because they need to have those available to kind of cash out, they were showing more and more, quote, losses on paper.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they had like all these a ton of depositors with way over the
large
250K
deposits.
limit,
Yeah.
large deposits, who in today's world you don't have to, like in It's a Wonderful Life. I don't have to walk up to the doors of the bank and ask and put my deposit slip in. I just type a few things on my phone and click, 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 boom, boom, bang, and I've just moved $10 million from bank
Yeah.
Y to bank X. So
Yeah.
that, and the combination of the Twitterverse, when this whole Silicon Valley culture, they're all like,
Accelerating the, yeah.
they're all on Telegram. They got their private Telegram groups, and they're saying, "Hey, da 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 da. Hey, did the
Yeah.
CEO made a pretty bad look? I heard the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank just made they're going to sell some stock because they have to cover their money. What?
Yeah.
Bam, boom.
There's a really good example of a situation that if you're an executive of a commercial banking institution, you can't just sell your bank stock, right? You have to go through a whole process of, letting
Right,
everybody know it's coming, and put it in a date where it's not going to be a time frame where it's not getting
right,
affected by the earnings call and so on. So
right.
this was scheduled a long time ago. It just bad optics, right? I had a CEO
Bad
who
optics,
was always
bad
telling
time,
me
bad play.
it's
A
all
bunch of
about the
things.
optics, right? It just
Right,
looks bad. It doesn't matter how innocent your
bunch of things
decision
all
was,
came together in
but it
the
all, yeah,
wrong
you
way.
say it all came together. Yeah.
So conversely, back to the Hawaii Bank's
Yeah.
safety thing,
Yeah.
we know that, I don't know what the asset mix is, but like
But
you
you can
said,
look
they
it up.
have, you could look it up.
You
But I
can
would
look it
just
up,
think, just
and
intuitively, I would think
very
they've
different. Yeah.
it's very, very different. It's not
My
there's not that
recollection
much.
of, yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. Not that much exposure, perhaps, to the type of securities that Silicon Valley Bank was holding. They're more like maybe mortgage-backed securities, which, again, it's just a different mix. It's not the same mix as Silicon Valley Bank.
And not to get technical, but how you hedge really matters, right? Did you swap out your variable
Right.
interest rate risk for fixed rate, or vice versa, right? I mean,
Right.
there are ways to manage the
There are ways to manage, man,
market
and
risk, the interest rate risk in your portfolio that people are paid to do. That's their actual job, and that corporate culture should embrace. And in my experience, at I'll say Bank of Hawaii, right? I thought at the time, 20 years ago, I thought we were a leader in it. We were trained by refugees from the guy who led our bank for a while was the former CFO at Bank of America, and after he left Bank of Hawaii, became the chairman of Citigroup. So we have some big dogs, right? The chief
big
credit
dogs.
officer at B of
Yeah.
A came to be the chief credit officer, chief risk officer at Bank of Hawaii. So and then all the people I work with, and by the way, they all lead the bank now. The CEO, the CFO at Bank of Hawaii were all those kids, back in the day when we were all kids, who were doing rigorous financial and credit risk analytics. And I'll tell you what, no offense to the other banks in town, but all the good guys at those banks, a lot of the good guys at those banks, are Bank of Hawaii refugees. So that culture, that
Culture.
rigorous uh, market, credit, liquidity, risk management emphasis is, in my opinion, pervasive in the management teams that you see around Honolulu. We've all worked together. We've all, you mentioned
Right.
Neil making a statement for the Bankers Association. I'm like, oh wow, he's not at First Hawaiian anymore. And all right, we all married each other.
It's a
So
tight, well, it's a
yeah,
tight, well, that's what's interesting about Hawaii culture too. It's a tight crowd.
it's
Everybody,
all in the Ohana, brother.
it's all in the Ohana, man.
Yeah.
Exactly. To Andy, a hat tip to our friend
which
Andy Bumatai. It's
means
all in the
which
Ohana.
means there's peer monitoring, right? You
There's
cannot
peer
make ass in
monitoring.
front of your relatives, bro.
We'll make ass in front of
Don't
your
make ass
relatives
in front of your
because you
relatives,
because we're
or
all getting together for so and so's birthday party this
your
weekend,
uncle
and we're
going to
all going to
false
see each
crack
other.
you, bro. Okay, so
Hey, so Sterling. Okay,
behave.
so let's behave. So let's pop in Sterling's, which is quite relevant. Quite relevant. Sterling says, "Hey, do you think the new COVID work environment impacted the regulatory environment with audits, checks, and balances? Could this thing, everyone's working remotely. There's no water cooler conversation. There's no, hey man, what are you doing? What the heck? It's all kind of isolated stuff.
I
What do you think about that?"
I kind of doubt it in the sense that in two senses. First of all, this is all done remotely anyway now, and I mean both the people doing the math and the people supervising It's true. There was a time after the Asian financial crisis when Bank of Hawaii went through this kind of reinvention of its risk management culture, where Federal Reserve examiners like lived on our floor at the bank for a year. This one guy, I got to know him really well, and when I go to DC, we go have dinner together and whatnot. Dude, I learned mass amounts of. You want to learn risk management? Talk to the examiner. They'll tell you don't talk to the examiners, but they'll teach you what they're looking. You can go to the regulator's website and look at the examiner's like handy guide, what they're looking for, the way things should be done. So anyway, my point is that these these teams now are working remotely much more than was the case pre-COVID. So I doubt if it's kind of a water cooler lapse that is the problem. But I actually don't know, and I think this would be the kind of question that somebody would want to look into. I do think the question to which we alluded a second ago about the acceleration of disinformation or misinformation in the social media environment that now exists, as opposed to the one that existed in the 2007 2008 financial crisis, or the 1997 1998 Asian financial crisis. I think that's a huge, you know different difference in the nature of the information, the ambient information environment in which these organizations now operate. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I remember going to a conference and hearing this young kid, some math wizard, after the Asian financial crisis, present a paper on, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it was something like um, rational, stochastic, dynamic, asymmetric information, non-collusive asymmetric information herding games. Whoa, let's unpack that. Rational, you're thinking about it, you're forming an expectation about the future. Dynamic, rational, stochastic, dynamic. There's noise, there's stochastic, there's things happening, scary things you don't expect that you have to manage. Dynamic, they're happening over time. So rational, stochastic, dynamic. Non-collusive, right? Banks can't talk to each other and collude, use the same secret sauce. So everybody's trying to do their own good work, right? Non-collusive, asymmetric information. That's what we talked about earlier, where the average investor on the mainland doesn't know what's going on in Hawaii. The average investor around the world at the time of the Asian financial crisis, when something hits the fan, everybody says Thailand, Taiwan, same thing, yeah. Or, oh, volcano on the Big Island. Oh, hey, Maui, that's in Hawaii, right? Yeah, volcano. Oh, I better go somewhere else, right? Oh, uh, um, Operation Desert Storm. Oh, brother, war in the Kuwaiti desert. Oh, better not go to Hawaii, on the other side of the planet, right? Asymmetric information, herding game. What's that? The herd all moves in the same direction, right? Because they don't know any better. There's more information revealed to, say, an investor in bank stock by the fact that the entire herd is going the other way than will be revealed by doing your own personal due diligence, looking up the Hawaii Bank's balance sheets and reading the biographies of the CEO and the CFO and the chief risk officer and the chief technology officer, getting to know those guys, getting to know those people really well. That's just the nature of
The nature of the beast.
rational, stochastic, dynamic,
There,
non-collusive, asymmetric. Uh, I left a word out.
so
Herding games.
that's a wild one. Okay, we got about 10 minutes left
Yeah.
max out. So gang, if you have any questions, pop them in now. I've got a question for you, Paul, but gang, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat so we can ask Paul before we bring this out to a close. We're coming into a close. Paul, here's a question I've got for you now. So, okay. So what I kind of caught on the headlines, and again, I'm the guy that's watching the herd and wondering, I'm not going to go to Hawaii because there's a volcano in the Big Island. I'm clueless, asymmetric, right?
Yeah.
So I'm the ultimate asymmetric example. I know nothing about this industry. I look at the headlines. Now, one I caught really quick was Yellen had said something to the effect of, "Hey, we're not going to guarantee the deposits of everyone in every bank. We're just going to guarantee the deposits of ones in the too big to fail banks, the systemic risk banks, right?
I
We're going to
did she
guarantee
actually?
those.
That doesn't sound
No,
like something Janet Yellen would say.
no, I'm sure it wasn't. I'm just
Yeah.
this is my basic
Okay.
head, right? So,
Right.
but it's something along those lines,
Yes.
that they said, look, we're going to protect the ones that are too big to fail. The rest of them, you're up to 250, you're good. And so my question is, if that starts to roll around, if that starts kind of becoming like the accepted thing, my question is, if I'm a big depositor, and I'm not, but what if you're one of these companies that's got 10 million in the bank, you're not going to keep it at a regional bank now with this current thing. You're going to move it to
No,
one
no,
of
no,
these
no,
too
no.
big to fail banks.
Okay,
No?
whoa, let's reel it back in here because
Reel it back in.
I think we got the premise wrong. I don't think that's what Janet Yellen said.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to me. But it's important because we have to think about what the boundaries should be on the principle that you raise in the context of what, a subject that she brought up. I'm sure you're right that she's been talking about this stuff. So we, the people, right, the US Treasury, the Federal Reserve System, et cetera, we protect the system. We don't protect individual banks. We certainly should not protect individual banks' investors. That's their risk. That's on them. They built their house on the volcano. They built their house where the sea is rising. They invested in a company that they shouldn't have. That's private risk, not public risk. But the system needs to be secure. And most of the time, and this gets a little sketchy, we shouldn't protect the executives per se, the managers. Their fiduciary responsibility is to their shareholders, but they also have a responsibility, morally at least. And I think, in fact, in the way that banks are regulated as well, to their depositors. But we have insurance for the depositors so that not everybody has to go and do this homework that we're talking about. In the organizations, the corporate organizations, large nonprofits, pension funds, and so on, that do have large amounts of liquidity, lots of amounts of money deposited in um, uh, banking institutions, institutions that do both sides of the balance sheet. They take deposits and make loans. In those kinds of large depositor types of institutions, there are professional liquidity management teams, treasuries, departments of the treasury within an organization that are responsible for doing that. So that's their job. They're the ones who are supposed to be doing the research. But for the typical average investor, it's not on us. It's not on you. And Janet
Here's the
Yellen,
quote.
I'm sure, is saying, yeah,
Here's the quote from CNBC.
yeah,
It says, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told senators that government refunds of uninsured deposits will not be extended to every bank that fails, only those that pose systemic risk to the financial system. So,
yeah. Well, what does that mean? That,
right,
what we saw in the 2008 boundary, right? September 12th or Friday or 15th on Monday, when Lehman Brothers failed, we saw in the catastrophic meltdown of financial markets that followed, that we reach a threshold wherein the deposit insurance system per se, it can't handle all deposits, but
right, right.
we need the system to work because it's really efficient, right? It deploys capital where it can be most efficiently put to use and generate the income, or in the case of housing, the consumption of housing services that we seek to finance. So that was a moment where the systemic implications were so large that we had to come up with an innovative response. Ben Bernanke, Tim Geithner, Hank Paulson, when he was Treasury Secretary before Tim Geithner went in. Tim Geithner, when he was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is the leader among the leaders in the Federal Reserve System. We're nowhere near that. The whole point of the interventions now is to prevent us from getting anywhere near that. But there's peculiar set of circumstances that's at work in this historical instance. We've hit on many of them that makes it important for us to be attentive as depositors and investors, and for um, us to be paying attention to what leadership is doing. Now, my personal opinion is that the A team is in charge here, so that's the least of my worries. I mean, Janet Yellen herself was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, under which Silicon Valley Bank was regulated, and in that Ohana, right, in that neighborhood, in that community, in that Kuleana, these people all know each other, like people in Honolulu all know each other. Then she was a Federal Reserve governor, and now she's Secretary of the Treasury. In addition to being a brilliant economist, I mean, just straight up brilliant, like light years above the rest of us. So um, it's true that even the smart kids in the room, will face challenges that are unprecedented. And it's also true that the smart kids in the room frequently are responsible for creating the vulnerabilities. This is what happened with derivatives and whatnot in the subprime lending crisis 20 years ago. And this is what happened when the smart kids in the room in East Asia with the tiger economies and 10 years of uninterrupted, economic growth on a for which there was no regional parallel in history, came to a sudden stop after the handover of Hong Kong from Britain to the People's Republic on July 2nd, 1997. Right, there are these moments. March 11th or whatever it was, 2023 will be one of those moments. September 15th, 2008 was one of those moments where big things happened really fast,
Big things
and
happen.
yeah, we have to pay attention. But I think we should ease up on the fear mongering and go home, cook rice, brother.
So, okay, that's a great way to kind of begin to wrap this up. I want to give a quick acknowledgement to Patrick, who says, "Hey, mahalo to you both today. Great discussion, the learning opportunity." Patrick, Paul's the best for that. He's just so fun and I love
I,
the local slang he kind of throws
I'm
in. Cook
just
rice.
another observer like the rest of you, watching the
Well, a
play
little.
from the
Uh,
from the loge.
with a little bit more with a little well there's a little bit more of a less of a there's less of an asymmetry with you,
Well,
Paul, than with the rest of us.
it's
You have
sort
a
of
little
like
bit less asymmetry.
at the end of Pee Wee's Big Adventure, right, where Dottie says, "Aren't you going to watch the movie?" And Pee Wee says, "I don't have to watch it. I lived it."
I
So
lived it.
I
Read it.
lived
Yeah,
it. I
exactly,
was there.
exactly.
I saw the Asian financial crisis. I
Mark,
retired during the subprime financial crisis. Yeah, trust me,
there
I
you
lived it.
go.
I started out with the Latin American debt crisis. This is not one of those.
So what I basically what the again we're not giving any investment advice. We're not telling people to do one way or another. Do your own research. We have to kind of disqualify what we're saying. But what I basically hear what you saying, Paul, is first and foremost, if you've got under 250K in the bank, you're good. You got nothing to worry about. It's FDIC, whatever. Um, if it's over that, you should do your due. If you have millions in the bank, you should do your due diligence according to having millions in the bank. You gotta, that's
Hire a
just on
kid
you.
from UH. They're learning all this stuff.
Hire
You'll have
like
no problem.
Sterling. Well, he's not a kid
Hire
anymore.
Sterling.
Sterling was
Well,
a kid 30 years ago, but
he's an old
he
dog
was a
like the
kid.
rest of us.
He's
Hire
an old
Sterling's
man now. Yeah.
kids. They'll do it
Yeah,
for you.
hire Sterling's kids. There you go. Hire Sterling's kids. Uh, you know, uh, 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 Mark Whitehill, another member of the Eleanor Ohana. I'm glad, very informative and entertaining. Good. I'm glad you feel that way. It's always. I knew it was gonna be fun having Paul on. Um, but so, but to summarize it, hey, look, stay calm. This is not. Let's let go of the fear mongering. You got the A team, Janet Yellen. You have the A team who's running the show. Um, Silicon Valley Bank did some basically what I hear you kind of saying in a nice way, some stupid things. They weren't doing things not so smart.
I don't want to be mean. They were
Okay.
inattentive, maybe. They got stuck in a weird moment in history. It happens, I
Wrong
don't
place, wrong. Okay, wrong place, wrong place, wrong time, wrong circumstances. You're
they
being
they,
generous. Okay, and
they
I
should have
will I will
had
follow you.
the guys I worked with at Bank of West Treasury running theirs. That's all I can
Okay,
say.
so you're being generous, and I'm going to follow your lead and be generous too. Say, look, wrong place, wrong time, wrong circumstance, wrong collection of things, all kind of came together, and so it didn't fly out. But that's not we don't have anything like the systemic issues that we had in previous crisis. It's not anything like that. Go ahead.
Let me add one final thing. Somebody asked about this, and I kind of skipped over it. Somebody raised the question of loan quality. You can look up mortgage delinquency rates in Hawaii right now. I think it's something like under like 1%, right? The delinquency rates in most lines of commercial lending are amazingly low. Household balance sheets are still in pretty good shape. You know, after the stimulus, people saved a lot and have burned that off. They paid off some their debt and now they're rebuilding it. So there are some issues in the backdrop, but nothing like we've seen in terms of loan quality um, prior to the financial crises we can look back in history to which we can look for guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. And Joan's happy. Joan says, "Thank you, great. This was great. Thank you. In fact, next Wednesday, I'm going to the annual meeting of my credit union. Great. Hey, let's, Paul, really quick. What's a question that Joan should raise her hand and ask, and sound like she's asking a good question? What would be if you're attending the annual meeting and there was a
Yeah.
Q&A session? What question would you ask, Paul?
Well, I'd have several. One would be: is the credit union National Association, the provider of credit union deposit insurance, are is your credit union right? Your credit union's a membership organization, so you have a right to ask any of these questions. Are Is there any chance that this credit union, your credit union, could be exposed to the kind of funding risk that? So I doubt it's doubtful. And then that's on the liability side of the balance sheet. On the asset side of the balance sheet, ask them. Did I get that backwards? Anyway, ask them to give you a rundown. What's your loan portfolio look like? What's the securities portfolio? Typically it's like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. And by the way, it's designed, right? Mostly loans, maybe a minority in securities, because their values tend to offset each other like a seesaw. That's part of the risk management strategy that most banks operate. And then finally, ask about asset quality, right? Are your loan losses something to be concerned about? Is there a legacy of the pandemic for commercial borrowers, for firms that were, caught out of position or find out that they woke up in a different world from the one they went into pre-COVID, one with more remote work, one with fewer people dining out, one with more delivery and e-commerce than traditional retail, right? There's a lot of things happening. One with they own a building where there's a lot of vacant office space that probably won't be used in the future the way it was used in the past. People need to be on top of the changes that have occurred, and that's what management is for, to represent you as a credit union depositor or shareholder.
That is excellent. That I mean, we saved the best for last, and Auntie Joan, thanks for bringing that up because Paul, I think you just gave everybody a great selection. Three simple questions to ask the bank. If you have a question of the bank or the credit union or whatever, ask those three questions. Fabulous. Look, gang, we're gonna wrap this up. Paul, do you have any final words you want to kind of share with everybody? Like last parting shots as we close the doors. Anything you want to share with everyone, Paul?
Well, there's always something you didn't think about, you know, lurking in the backdrop, waiting to jump out at you. So that's just the world we live in. If the pandemic didn't convince you of that, I don't know what will. But on the other hand, that's the world we always live in. And we always go about doing our business from day to day, getting stuff done, taking care of our families, irrespective of what's happening in the backdrop. Now, sometimes it's gnarly. In Ukraine, it's gnarly. In Syria, it's gnarly. Uh, bless the cosmos that I don't have those problems. And maybe let's think about how we can help those who do. But this is reality. There's always something about to blow up, and you just need to kind of go about doing your thing as efficiently, as productively as you can. Don't be slacking, bro, because everybody else is depending on you.
Excellent. That is about a good of a great a close as I could have ever asked for. I could not have said that better myself. So I'm just going to end it with that. Paul, say goodbye to everybody. Everybody, say goodbye to Paul. We're going to close it up. Y'all have a great weekend. Take care. Like you said, take care of, because we're all dependent on you. Do the right thing. Take care and do good. All right, folks, we're going to close this up right here. I can't end it any better. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Mahalo,
one,
Peter.
everybody. Aloha. Hold on,
Aloha.
Paul. Stay on the line because we're going to close. We're going to go
Of
off
course.
the thing. Man, say goodbye to everybody else first. Bye, everyone. Aloha.
See you later.